Welcome to day 18 of a study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Today's lesson is entitled, Do Not Make Yourself Too Wise. And our verses are in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 15 through 29. In my vain life I have seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand. For the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. Wisdom gives strength to the wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. Do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. All this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? I turned my heart to know and to search out and seek wisdom and the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. Beginning in 2003 and continuing for more than a dozen years, the show Mythbusters used the elements of scientific method to test the validity of rumors, myths, movie scenes, adages, internet videos, and news stories on the Discovery Channel. Scientific method is defined as a process for experimentation that is used to explore observations and answer questions. That process is generally accepted by many as consisting of 6 steps. Number 1, ask a question. 2, do background research. 3, construct a hypothesis. 4, test your hypothesis. 5, analyze your data. And 6, communicate your results. This method is not owed to a single individual, but one developed over centuries of debate as to how best to find out how things work around us. This method is taught in modern classrooms, but not always used in those specific ways outside the classroom. Some disciplines are not able to use this method completely, like astronomy. However, this method is widely used by scientists, psychologists, and yes, even myth-buster enthusiasts. Jamie Heineman and Adam Savage, both special effects experts in the entertainment field, popularize science and technology in their long-running series Mythbusters. They have won the praise of many for their pursuit of truth in spite of widely held popular beliefs and urban legends. Some of the surprises they found to be true is that the human voice, unaided, can actually shatter glass. They busted the commonly held myth that we only use 10% of our brain. In actuality, we use much, much more. They busted the myth that bulls are drawn to the color red. In fact, they are drawn to movement. They even proved you can't sink in quicksand. It's too dense. All of these and more were proven by using the scientific method. For our consideration today, we look at Solomon's ability to observe the world around him and come to conclusions. Remember, the scientific method had not come into being as we know it today. But does that mean that Solomon could not reason and come to conclusions? Absolutely not. Solomon tells us that he observed and asked questions and concluded. How did Solomon formulate the law of conservation of energy millennia before scientists knew this? We read in Ecclesiastes 3:14, I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. Or Solomon's observation of the cycle of wind in Ecclesiastes 1:6. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. That was not known or understood until recent times. Or how about the water cycle in Ecclesiastes 1:7? All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. And again in Ecclesiastes 11:3, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. Man did not begin to understand this until the late 1500s. Solomon's wisdom was proclaimed far and wide. We read in 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 33 and 34. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. And the people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who heard of his wisdom. Solomon, by wisdom, also understood human nature as well. We read of his first technical case in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 23 and 28. Then the king said, the one says, this is my son that is alive, and your son is dead. And the other says, no, but your son is dead, and my son is the living one. And the king said, bring me a sword. So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death. But the other said, he shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide him. Then the king answered and said, give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death. She is the mother. And all Israel heard the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. Solomon makes observations of life that help us to bust the myths that many believe. The righteous don't always outlast the wicked. We find that in verse 15. The attempt to be too wise often has unintended consequences. Consider the isolation it may incur, producing animosity and envy from fellow men who are put off by one's profession of wisdom, in verse 16. Consider the Pharisees and Sadducees of Jesus' day who believed themselves to be above the law. He observes also the tendency to overreact in verse 17. If I shouldn't be too wise, then wickedness must have some virtue. Didn't Paul encounter such thoughts in his day? We read in Romans chapter 6 and verse 1. What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound? And again in Colossians 2:21 through 23. Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that all perish as they are used, according to human precepts and teachings. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. Solomon declares that these extremes should be avoided. And then he moves us toward the statement to which shall guide them and us. It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand. For the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. Ah, yes, the fear of God. What does this lead? Proverbs 9:10, Solomon declares, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. What is wisdom's benefit? Solomon rightly deduces in verse 19, wisdom gives strength to the wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. And when Solomon declares in verse 20, "Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins." Isn't that what Paul indeed declares in Romans 3:23? "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Solomon continues on in his observations of life. Yet, within the model of observation, there are certain aspects he realized can only be known by God. Verses 23 and 24. "All this I have tested by wisdom, I said, I will be wise. But it was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. And who can find it out?" As even Moses declared in Deuteronomy 29:29, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law." Solomon had already declared such a thing in Ecclesiastes 3:11. "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to the end." Yet Solomon's observation in the end yields perhaps one of the saddest commentaries upon this life. Verse 29. "See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes." How keen are your powers of observation in this life? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow for another lesson in the book of Ecclesiastes.